Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining this webinar, part two of our webinar series, talking about the level two assessment. I'm Chris Clark from ATI, and we're hosting this with our partners at Beryllium by InfoSec. So for a few items to begin, we do have a previous webinar series that you can view. And I'll put the link in the chat here for you, so you can view the previous webinar series if you do want to learn more about CMMC, if you have any questions. While we're using this Zoom session webinar series, all participants are muted. So if you do have any questions, please put those in the Q&A. Please don't put them in the chat. But rather in the Q&A. So that Q&A option should be there at the bottom or top of your Zoom screen. If it's not there, hit those three dots that say more in the Q&A is probably underneath there. And then without further ado, I'll hand it over to Derek White to get the webinar started.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. Appreciate the intro. And welcome back for those that have been a part of the series of webinars we have done, not just with this series that's going to be on a relatively monthly basis, but the last time we did this, it's good to see people showing up and having great questions as the CMMC program and reality starts to take shape. So thank you again. Yes, Chris, thank you for mentioning Q&A is where you want to put your questions. I will be monitoring some of those as we go through this, and then we'll have some live Q&A at the end. So don't drop those in the chat, drop those in the Q&A. So if you remember last time, if you were here last time, every time we do one of these, we bring on a new guest on a different topic and sort of in a flow of where things really do hit home and where they matter. So today I'm really, really excited to have our good friend Katie Dodson on, president at Hive System Defense Solutions. Katie, thank you for being here. Can you spend just a couple minutes talking about who you are, what you guys do, and then we'll roll right into it.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for inviting me to join you guys for the webinar series. So as Derek mentioned, I am president of Hive Systems Defense Solutions. We are a C3PAO, so I'm also a lead CCA performing a lot of the assessments that we are doing in-house, but also 1099ing out to a lot of different C3PAOs. So I've kind of seen how some of the different C3PAOs are approaching these assessments, seeing some of the things that are working and not working, and kind of just understanding the nuance and the differences between how C3PAOs are approaching these assessments. So hoping to bring some of that insight today. I do also have previous experience at PwC and at the Defense Cybercrime Center, actually receiving all that DFAR 7012 reporting. So I did want to come back to the private sector, felt I could do more to help the defense contractors from this side rather than being on the government side, but happy to be here and help answer some questions.
Yes, thank you. And for those that are watching now or watching later, Katie and their team, if you go to their website, they have some great resources that are free that you should utilize. We point people in that direction quite a bit. I got to know Katie a lot better in May, I can't remember, finally at a conference where everybody from the industry seemed to be there, and you joined our podcast, which was great. And when we started talking about this webinar series with ATI, and knowing, come October, come November, when we anticipated something like CMMC rulemaking and 48 CFR and things coming into place, we thought the easy topic would be to revisit sort of the frequently asked questions. And so we're going to do that today, but really focused on passing a CMMC level 2 assessment. We're not going to go through the 101 of CMMC and what's level 1, what's level 2, and CUI and all that today. Those are on the previous webinar, so highly encourage those that are seeing this for the first time. Chris, I think you dropped that link in previous webinars. Watch them in order. It's really useful information that we're trying to do in a certain domino effect so that by the time 2026 gets here and things are more active in the CMMC space as far as how assessments are going, what OSC should be focused on, then hopefully you can reference to those. So what we did is we did survey our own teams, our marketing, our sales, our SMEs that are working with clients. Katie and her team did it too. We talked to our partners and our peers, and said, hey, we're doing this webinar, and if you have questions that maybe have been asked before or starting to be asked for the first time, what are those? And Katie and I did talk a little bit about these, and so we're going to roll through those. And if you have questions, again, pop them into the Q&A, and we will try to get to what we can at the end. So, first things first, implementation. This is almost the same identical slide as the last time we did this, but since we did this a month ago, there have been more concrete details on when that effective date goes into place, which has been highlighted here. So Katie, you want to walk people through what this means now versus what it did, say, a month ago?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the time since you guys last talked about this graphic, we now actually have a start date for CMMC that will be mandatory and in effect as of November 10th. So what we'll see for the first year from now until November 10th of 2026 is that any new DoD contracts and any contracts that are renewing their option years may start seeing level 1 and level 2 self-assessment requirements pop up within the next year, which ultimately means that starting next November is when you're going to start seeing those level 2 certification requirements coming in. And I know it seems like it's a long way off, but a lot of the C3PAOs are already booking into even May and June of next year. So if it's something that you want to be certified before that deadline starts and you start seeing those contracts requiring certification, the time is now to really start making sure that you are planning for CMMC, getting on a C3PAO's books for next year to make sure that you're not missing that deadline. So with phase 2, you'll start seeing level 2 certification requirements popping up in new DoD contracts and in the option years. So that in 2027, that's when you'll start seeing level 3. And then by November of 2028, every single DoD contract, every renewed option year, they're all going to have some level of CMMC requirement. And that'll either be level 1, level 2, self-assessment, certification, or level 3. So
Yeah.
just kind of phasing in that approach, but ultimately those key deadlines now are you should make sure that your level 1 at least is done before November. Start planning to make sure that you have self-assessed at level 2 for those new contracts, and then plan ahead for making sure that you're getting on the schedule to get certified before November 10th of next year.
Yeah, and a couple major asterisks and caution flags here come in
Yeah.
twofold.
Mhm.
One, be careful scheduling with the C3PAO and not being ready. So we've seen a lot of that in the last 12 months where people go ahead and say, well, I'm going to get on Katie's team schedule, and then they go figure out what they're going to do. And then by the time Katie's team is busy and they start doing scoping, initial stuff, we're going to talk about this a little bit, you're not ready. And that's not fun. So think about that. But the second thing is there is a lot of discretion here, technically, that the primes and your customer can enforce. So if they want to, they can say, we are deciding that we need you to have a third party, a C3PO assessment certification as part of this. So as Katie just said, the number one thing you should always be doing, and this is the last thing we'll talk about in the past, but it's in the previous webinars, is if you already have the requirements for DFAR 7012 in CUI, then you should have been doing this, right? That's been the message. Self-assessment is really self-affirmation. That's the way that they have been using that is it's not just a document anymore where you say I'm good. I'm the senior official, I'm the CEO, whoever it's going to be, president of the company. You are self-certifying at that point if that requirement says that, and you are going to enter that into a government system. You do not want to be wrong with that. So that's an ugly conversation. I'd like to say very emotional conversation, probably down the road that you don't want to be in. So we're going to try to do what we can today to walk through some of those frequently asked questions. So reminder, people that you are getting contracts from have the right to say, this is important and we need you to do it now. So starting November 10th, if it's a new contract. So moving on. FAQ. So we're going to start with some of the frequently asked questions before we get into some more of the what's working, what's not working, and what to prepare for kind of thing. So FAQ. So again, some of these are questions that have been frequently asked. Some of these are more newer frequently asked. So the fun one that usually comes up is what and how long does it take for a level 2 assessment to take from start to finish? And we didn't put air quotes here, but Katie, talk about that for a few seconds if you can.
Yeah, so every C3PAO is going to be a little bit different on this, but what I can say is that for us, it's really like 3 months from scope and call all the way through to getting your certificate. And that's because of all the pre-work that is done. The bulk of the work for an assessment really only takes 1 to 2 weeks when we're actually sitting down and interviewing your team. It's just that we're doing those scoping calls and readiness checks like 2 months in advance to make sure you have the time, like Derek said, to finalize things, fix mistakes, catch any big red flags early so that you're not then having to reschedule your assessment. So the timing from that perspective may be different from C3PAO to C3PAO, but in my experience, the bulk of the lift for an assessment is really just the interview week. And that depends on your C3PAO as well. If you have multiple site visits, that might take a little bit longer because they're traveling different weeks, but the bulk of these assessments are taking about 1 week for actually sitting down, reviewing evidence, testing the controls, getting you your answers. You do have a 10-day window that every C3PAO has to give you to make minor corrections. I'll caveat that later as well, but that 10-day window could factor in as well. So if you are 110 at the end of your interview week, you're done there. But if you have some things you need to fix or people you need to bring back for a meeting, that could take that 10-day window as well. So while start to finish might be 3 months, really the lift from your team is probably going to be more like a week.
And so, some of the previous webinars that we have done does get into things like scope, preparation, documentation, and that does help not take as long as it can take. But you also, as you know, you guys don't make up how it goes. There's a process that C3POs and lead CCAs have to follow, right? You're not saying, hey, we're gonna do 17 calls with you just to get more money and more time. You guys want this to be efficient. You want people to pass, right? But you have those pre-calls in order to let people know what might be missing, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. So that's important to know. And again, there's plenty of full-on hour-long conversations on that from from previous webinars. Okay, so then in that sense, I guess good transition here is what kind of evidence do assessors expect to see in order to make those assessments be efficient?
Yeah, so when it comes to uploading evidence, you definitely have to have your SSP and your documentation. So your policies, your procedures, anything else that's referenced in your SSP as an external document have to be uploaded and provided. Your POAMs, your risk assessment, your tabletop exercises, things like that. You can provide screenshots for configurations and baselines and things like that as well. That's always helpful. I know that we try to rely on those as much as possible and then kind of just spot check them during the assessment to make sure that everything is matching what was provided, but we can't just take screenshots at face value. So don't expect that if you provide screenshots for everything that it means that you don't have to do any demos during the interview week at that point, because no matter what, you are going to have to screen share some things, even if it's just for us to get a comfort level around, okay, this all matches what you provided. So what you provided me probably has not changed in the last week or two. But there are some C3PAOs that want to see a screen share for everything and won't even really consider screenshots. So those are types of things that you should also be asking when you're vetting your C3PAOs. But we take kind of a hybrid approach. We need to see the documentation. We like to see screenshots because then it helps facilitate the interview week, make things go faster. We're just validating, spot checking, takes less of your time to do things that way. But we absolutely are fine with just seeing it all live if you don't want to take the time to provide the screenshots as well. But as far as what we expect to see, expect a lot of live demonstrations and definitely provide documentation, training certificates, all those things that are required to prove that you actually have implemented whatever you say you have implemented in your SSP.
Yeah, so the operational SSP is key. So
Mhm.
having that ready, like, and I love that you highlighted that, assume you're going to get asked. Assume you're going to be
Mhm.
show it live, show me screenshots, and you already have it. If you have it in place, then have that evidence ready, which is good. Kind of rolls into the next question here then is, and this probably stems from the amount of content and marketing that, and I'll say that lightly, on that's out there and has been out there for years, is
Mhm.
how much weight is given to, say, documentation versus technical tools and implementation system stuff being in place?
So I very much want to highlight here that if you have the technical implementation in place, that is great. But there are objectives that specifically say you have to have certain things defined or documented or identified. And those objectives can only be validated if it's written down somewhere. So documentation is critical, especially for those assessment objectives, and you're not allowed to create new documentation during an assessment. So it can be documented in your SSP. It can be documented in a separate policy or procedure. It depends on what makes the most sense for you. But especially for anything that says define, identify, or document, you have to have a document where it's explicitly stated somewhere. So technical implementation alone is not enough. And another piece that I want to kind of talk about here too, there are a number of processes that you have to implement in order to meet these control requirements. So there are some tools out there, especially the pre-built enclaves and things like that, that try to say we take care of all of CMMC for you. That is not possible. There are always going to be certain controls that even if you got a pre-built enclave where people are doing vulnerability management for you and things like that, there's still, for example, change management where you have to have an established process and tracking, and your access management procedures have to exist to authorize users to your environment. So there's never going to be a blanket check the box solution that takes care of all of CMMC for you. You need to have processes in place, have them documented, and you need to be having a paper trail and enforcing them so you can prove it to your assessor as well. So even if you have that technical implementation, documentation is still critical. And going back to the SSP, I have seen SSPs where the implementation statement was just, yes, we are doing this, or restating the assessment objective. That does not tell me how you're doing it, and that does not help me or anyone else. So make sure that when you are documenting your SSP, you're actually saying, this is how we're doing this, or refer to this document for details on how we're doing this. But that SSP is ultimately your source of truth for your assessor so that they can know where to look to see, okay, this is how you say you're doing it. Now prove to me that you are following what you said.
Yeah, and the rule of thumb there too is, the word implementation sort of gets abused.
Yeah.
So, um, have multi-factor authentication. We have multi-factor authentication because we have Duo or whoever,
Yep.
Microsoft
Mhm.
Authenticator. It's not really implemented. Implemented means you have it documented to your point, and the processes in the not just the practices and stuff are in place. So you can have a lot of technology
Mhm.
with the lights that blink and the stuff is on and it's doing its stuff, but it's not truly implemented
Yeah.
until everything is documented. So great points there. And I know we've already got some questions here. We're going to come back to that one. So now the question is that usually right in order goes, what happens if a company isn't fully compliant, fully implemented during the assessment?
If you are lucky and what you have not implemented can be put on a POAM, you may still get a conditional certification. There are, I think, off the top of my head, maybe 44 controls that are allowed to be placed on a POAM, and you can have up to 22 of those and still get a passing score. So you need to score an 88 or higher. It needs to be one of the controls that is allowed to be placed on a POAM. So yes, if you're not compliant with one of those, you may be lucky enough to get a conditional certificate, and now you have 180 days to close it, get those POAMs assessed, and turn that over into a final. If you don't do it within 180 days, your conditional lapses and you have to do a whole new assessment over again.
Mhm.
So those are really critical to be aware of, those deadlines as well. Now, if you are not so lucky and you went into your assessment and you are missing items that cannot be placed on a POAM, then unfortunately you do not get any form of certification, not even a conditional, and you do have to start over with scheduling a new assessment and get it done from scratch in order to validate that those controls have all been met at 110. So especially when you are, I mean, hopefully you're going in with 110 from your self-assessment, but if for whatever reason there are some things that you are not implementing, make sure you prioritize the ones that cannot be placed on a POAM for remediation first.
Yep. And this is why the scoping and the pre-assessment work happens,
Mhm.
right? So that if you didn't, and so there's people who do best efforts and they think they've got it, and it's not because they're trying to cut corners, but they're not. And certain things aren't able to be seen or understood from the assessors. That's what those calls are for, so that you don't show up to an assessment, which you're going to get charged for, and be surprised. So it's not just the self-assessment. Mock assessments are really important if you can do them and have the time. But as we were saying before, if your assessment time's here, your pre-assessment works here. This isn't where you start asking your C3PAO. They can't consult with you. They can't do it for you. So it's back here that gets you to that point. You want to be ready by then. Should be ready, So uh, timing matters. Obviously, time and attention and expertise is huge. So make sure that you are on that and that's budgeted in. And responsibility is the other big thing. Another previous webinar we've done on responsibility that Katie's talking about, 320 assessment objectives are going to have to be answered by somebody or something. So whoever you outsource that to, that responsibility all has to be defined. The assessors are going to spend their time with that. That's important, because you can't sit there and tell Katie and her team, well, they do that and they do that, they do that. You can put it in your documentation, you can have it in there, but that's up to them. And if they don't have the same answer, right, then now we have a discrepancy. So, reminder too, again, I see some chats with questions. Drop those in the Q&A so that we can track those a little bit better. It's a little easier than the chat. So, this is a fun one. And we could probably, well, we don't have to combine this with the next one, but how much does an assessment cost, Katie? Can you give us that answer right now? No, I'm just kidding. So this is a fun one.
Right. Yes, this is a fun one because we get questions a lot where people just reach out and say, can I get a quote for an assessment?
Mhm.
You will never, well, I don't want to say never, but you will almost never be able to just get a number from a C3PAO from a cold email. Every C3PAO bases the assessment costs on the level of complexity of the environment that we're assessing. So they're always going to be either a call where they talk through what your environment is, or some sort of form that they want you to fill out to give us a better idea of, oh, are you completely virtual and contained within a VDI, or do you have 5 different physical locations that are in scope and everything's on-prem, or do you have a hybrid GCC high and Active Directory on-prem situation going on? Are you a manufacturer that has specialized equipment? So there is no easy answer to this question. And so you will find that there is a pretty big range in assessment costs depending on the level of complexity of your environment. So if you are reaching out to C3PAOs for quotes, just know that you're going to have to provide more information. We do it via a form. I know there are others who have you sign an NDA and then do a meeting. It depends on the company, but we try to make it as painless and simple as possible with our form process. But we do need information about what you're doing with your environment before we can actually get you a number.
And if they are responding back with a number from one email, then you should delete that email and talk to other people. We have some questions in here about C3PAOs and how do you identify good ones. We're going to get to that at the end during the Q&A. So hang tight on that, because there are things to be aware of. I'll say it that way, that we can talk about. Last FAQ before we get into some of the lessons learned here. What is the actual process of conduct? We've talked a little bit about this, but maybe walk through step by step, Katie, on what the actual process of conducting a level 2 assessment looks like and kind of why at each step.
Yeah, sure. So every C3PAO is going to do a scoping call. We do ours 2 months in advance. Ours is only an hour long. I think most C3PAOs are only an hour long. And really the root of that is to understand what the boundary is that you've defined, what your network architecture is, and what your CUI data flows are. Make sure that you have accounted for them appropriately, that you haven't left anything out, that you don't have any major red flags with your boundary and scope, because that is the number one thing that will cause you to fail an assessment, is if you have not done your boundary properly. Because it means you haven't accounted for everything, and you can't possibly have 110 if you haven't actually defined your boundary correctly. So we do that well in advance to make sure that everything makes sense and you've accounted for everything. Then there's also a readiness check step. C3PAOs will do that differently. We normally just have people upload a number of documents, including the SSP, so that we can validate that things are where they're supposed to be, that you have actually written implementation statements in your SSP and things like that. But again, that's going to vary from C3PAO to C3PAO, but that's ultimately to make sure that you are ready to actually start your assessment. And not that you are, to Derek's point, like that you scheduled with us and you don't even have an SSP documented yet, and your assessment's coming up in 2 weeks. Like that's going to be a problem. So that's what that readiness check is ultimately for, is kind of just looking for some of those big red flags that would cause you to basically go into an assessment and fail it.
Yeah.
And so then the actual interview week is when we're going to go objective by objective through all 320 and verify that you have met all of them. So that's going to be a combination of looking at evidence, like the documents that you've provided, to check those boxes on, oh, look, you did define what security functions are. There's going to be interviews to clarify how you are doing certain processes. There's going to be screen sharing to show me what configurations are actually set in your environment, that you have audit logging and monitoring correlation tools and things like that, demoing that those things work as expected, proving to me that someone can't log into an admin console with a non-privileged account, those types of things. So we will go objective by objective until we get through all 320 of them. And then you have that 10-day correction window that I mentioned before. A lot of C3PAOs will, following DIBCAC precedent, will allow you to make a couple of documentation updates here and there. So assuming you actually had the process in place and it wasn't documented quite correctly, you may be able to make those edits. We allow for those edits, but just to make sure that it matches what your actual technical implementation is. And that 10-day window is also for providing evidence that already existed that you couldn't find during your assessment, or for subject matter experts who were on vacation or leave during the assessment week that were needed in order to prove how something is done. We can schedule during that 10-day window with them, things like that. But every C3PAO has to give you that 10-day window. It was once upon a time was called the limited practice deficiency window. I don't actually know what it's called anymore because it's changed so many times, but that's ultimately what that's for. And then you have an out brief and you get your assessment results. And then we get to go play with EMAS, which never wants to cooperate, in order to get you your certificate generated. And you do end up getting that usually emailed to you, for your records. And that certificate does include the expiration dates and your assessment dates and your cage codes and things like that. So you'll know when you need to make sure you're getting recertified by as well.
Nice. Yes, that is. Thank you for walking through that because I can tell we already have some questions too on
Yeah.
the indicators, the nuances, some of that stuff that
Mhm.
changes per
Yeah.
per step, but that can be
Yes.
preventative on the early portions of the program that you're putting into place. All right, so we're
Absolutely.
going to transition into lessons learned from CMMC level 2 assessments. This is coming mainly from your guys' perspective here. We've got
Mhm.
lessons learned, and we have surveyed our friends and all this stuff too. But these are some of the ones that really stuck out. And one of the first ones is, what are the most common gaps? I think we've already had some questions in the Q&A on this, but where are you
Mhm.
seeing some of the most common gaps and shortcomings that you feel are not just common, but also, uh, those shouldn't be ones that should be missed, kind of a thing, and why some of that would happen.
Yeah, so as I said before, one of the number one things that can cause you to fail an assessment is an improperly defined boundary or scope. So, for example, if you are using a cloud provider like Microsoft GCC High, but you're not using a VDI, then your endpoints are going to be in scope. And there are some people who think because everything's in the cloud and you're not downloading from the cloud, you don't have those endpoints in scope. But unfortunately, specifically the way CMMC has defined processing, storing, and transmitting CUI, they have included accessing CUI. So that's why if you have a VDI, you can confine your boundary to the VDI solution, assuming you have it only configured to allow for keyboard, voice, and mouse inputs. So no printing, no for movable media, things like that. You can get away with confining your boundary to the VDI if you're doing it that way. But if you are accessing a cloud solution from a laptop, that laptop is in scope, which means now you have to have device management on that laptop. You have to have hardening and configurations for that laptop, and all of that's going to be in scope. So we have had issues with people not really understanding that component, of boundary and scoping. So that's a huge one. Another area that we've seen a lot of issues is the use of external service providers. And this is an area that's still a little bit fuzzy that the most recent town hall just put out new guidance about when something is or is not a cloud service provider as well. And so hopefully we'll get more in writing soon about that. But if you are a cloud, if you're an external service provider that's a cloud that's got CUI, you need to be FedRAMP moderate or equivalent. So if you're using a cloud service provider and they are touching CUI, then they better be FedRAMP moderate or equivalent. But we are seeing issues where the ESPs that are not a CSP that get CUI on their assets are not CMMC level 2 certified. They don't have to be technically, but now their entire boundary is part of your assessment if they are not certified, because their boundary is now part of your boundary because you are flowing CUI to them. So these are the types of things that we check during that initial scoping call is, do you have external service providers? Are they a cloud provider or not? And do they get CUI on their assets or not? We do see a lot of companies that have a third party doing MSP services for them, but they've brought them in-house and given them accounts in their own tenants, and so then they are no longer an external service provider because nothing is flowing out of the boundary to their assets. So that is one way you can mitigate that. But if you are sending any CUI to a third party for whatever reason, they need to meet either CMMC level 2 or they need to meet FedRAMP moderate or higher, depending on if they're a cloud provider or not. So that's another big one that we try to check as early as possible. We have had assessments rescheduled because they were using ESPs that hadn't been certified yet. So we had to push them back until that third party got certified. And then we talked about this a little bit, but your poorly documented implementation statements in your SSP, if it doesn't say what you're actually doing or reference to a document that says what you're actually doing, then that's a huge gap and shortcoming. I've seen some SSPs that needed complete rewrites. So luckily they were mock assessments at the time, but they ended up making the whole assessment process far more challenging because they had to explain how they were doing everything and show other documents that talked about how they were doing it. And it really just needed to all be in the SSP, and it was not. So I think those are the most common gaps and shortcomings that we see that can cause major issues for the certification.
Yeah, no, and you're not wrong. The external service provider with ESP is a huge. They put
Mhm.
out a memo in 2023. Just not to talk about ourselves, but that's
Mhm.
exactly what we did.
Yep.
Was it's not worth arguing. And there's a lot of managed service providers, a lot of tools, a lot of things. It's not just are you sending them CY? It's do they have access to your CY? Are they monitoring security? Are they doing security protection on your assets? And there's a whole
Mhm.
nother webinar previously too, where we
Oh,
go
yeah.
through the scoping of what's a CUI asset, what's a security protection asset, because it does matter on your boundary. It does matter on your provider, internal, external, how that's all built out. We went through our FedRAMP moderate equivalency assessment last year. We're going through it again this year. It's required. We are a cloud service provider. That puts us in a different category. There are people out there who claim they aren't, and they are. And it's not just because of what they do, it's maybe some of the tools that they use. And so if they're providing a cloud service to do whatever they do for you, that makes them a provider of a cloud, which now impacts their requirements, and that you are inheriting then whether they have that or not, right? And that's it's hard. It is really, really is hard to dive into the weeds on that topic. So that's a whole nother conversation. We've done some of these in the past that are into that, but you're right. We're still getting clarity on some of that. But be aware if you have more questions, you want to talk to Katie's team or our team or talk to ATI about what that looks like. We're happy to help. I'm going to skip through this next one so you kind of just
Mhm.
answer that.
Yep.
But you did have a couple things here that we wanted to highlight as part of
Yes.
examples of why they maybe get missed.
This particular control is almost always misunderstood. And so I want to reiterate the importance of actually reading the assessment guide when you are doing your own builds and your self-assessments, because it does explicitly support like what these controls mean. So 3.3.3, if you read just the control, says review and update logged events. And so everybody always says, okay, I'm reviewing what is triggering in Sentinel. I'm reviewing what's coming up in Defender. I'm reviewing the logs. That's not what this means. This specifically means, do you have a list of what you want to log? And do you review that list at least once a year? So if you review the actual assessment guide, you'll see the highlighted portion down here under further discussion specifically says that this is not reviewing the audit records that are being triggered by the events that you selected. So this one is almost always incorrectly interpreted. And because it is one that requires defining the logged events, if you didn't know what this meant and you did not have a list of logged events, you fail this control.
Mhm.
I don't know off the top of my head if this can be poemed or not, but if it can't, then you just failed your entire assessment because you didn't read the assessment guide. So just make sure that as you are doing your own control builds, that you are reading the assessment guide and understanding what the controls actually mean. Another one that we see is people think that collaborative computing platforms mean teams. It specifically says that is not the case if you read the assessment objective. So those types of things, not assessment objective, if you read the assessment guide. So just make sure that you are reading the actual assessment guide as you're planning for your assessments.
And they just did some updating to FAQs and some other information that's
Yes.
been updated. But when Katie says assessment guide, when you see at the first graphic here, NIST 100 171A, that's
Mhm.
the assessment guide for NIST 100 171. So if you're just reading NIST 100 171,
Mhm.
word by word, the assessment guide is there to help you on what that means.
Yeah.
Examples, details, what they're looking for, because it's really from the assessor's perspective of that guide that
Mhm.
you're going to want to be aware of. So thank you for highlighting that and dropping these in here because it is a very big misconception. So we're going to roll through. We got so many questions, so I can't
Yeah.
wait to get to
I
Q&A. So
know.
this is going to be good. Um, I think we talked about this a little
Mhm.
bit. What makes you well prepared? So that's awesome. Um, what works, what doesn't? Again, I think we talked a little bit about this. Is there
Mhm.
anything there that you feel major red flag stuff that you want to highlight or anything in particular you want to answer that before we do a little bit of looking ahead and then drop into a good sizable Q&A time?
Yeah, sure. So as far as what works, we've already talked about having clear documentation, having a good SSP, making sure that your ESPs are compliant. But something that we always recommend is to do a mock assessment with a C3PAO, whether it's so some C3PAOs, you can do a mock and they can certify you. They just cannot tell you how to fix anything after the mock, but you can use a different C3PAO if you'd rather have someone help prepare you and then do a completely separate C3PAO for your certification. But either way, you should do a mock assessment because it'll give you the dry run of what to expect. It'll help you know how to answer questions properly. It'll collect all that evidence that you need and make sure that you're not missing any. And it'll kind of have like a pre-packaged plan of this is exactly what we did. Let's redo it for our certification assessment. Um, so kind of going hand in hand with that, making sure that your team's not going in blind to the assessment. So whether you're doing a mock assessment or just you had somebody else do a build for you and now it's being turned over to your admins, make sure your admin team actually knows what's been configured and what's going on in the environment so that they can speak to it when the assessor is in your certification assessment. So, I mean, something I always recommend, we do readiness as well. So for our clients that are doing a mock assessment with us for the readiness side, we have them pull screenshots, but also bookmark where those screenshots are coming from so that when they get into their certification assessment, it's like, oh, I just have to go right to this bookmark. Let me pull it up. There's no risk of my assessor seeing something I don't want them to see for this control. So that can go a long way. It's a lot of extra work up front, but it does support the assessment process a lot. It also helps your assessor narrow in on just what you want them to see. So just making sure that your admins actually know what they're doing in the environment goes a long way. And also always try to do a mock assessment if you can, because again, there's a lot of people out there who don't understand the controls or the interpretation of the controls, or they didn't read the assessment guide, and then they go into their certification and they didn't understand the controls, and now you did not pass your assessment and have to pay for it again. So always recommend doing a mock. As far as what doesn't work, we did talk about this a little bit, but being careful about those external service providers that you're using. We kind of talked about already how there are some out there that say, we will do 100% of CMMC for you, or we'll take care of pretty much all of CMMC for you. And if they say they can do all of it, then they're wrong and you should not use them as your provider. But there are good trusted solutions out there like QuickTrack that went through the due diligence to make sure they were meeting the compliance requirements. As a FedRAMP moderate or equivalent CSP, you're going to have a nice clean CRM that says exactly what you're responsible for in order to be compliant. There are others out there that have done the same, maybe not as a cloud service provider, but those ESPs that are doing services for you need to have an SRM as well. So they need to be giving you something that says, here's what we took care of and what you are responsible for. But just make sure that you're being very careful that they are compliant. I would trust a solution that's FedRAMP moderate or equivalent or is already CMMC level 2 certified over one that is not, just because they've been through the process, they know the controls, and so whatever they've built and had assessed already is probably more likely to be compliant. So just make sure that you're being very careful about your external service providers and those pre-built enclaves as well.
Yeah, we're gonna answer a couple of the mock assessment
Mhm.
questions, some external service provider questions, but also where some stuff can be found. So if you are in the Q&A, while we're answering some of these, specifically you, Katie, I'll be typing some answers, but we
You got it.
will we will provide some resource links afterwards for some of the questions because it's hard to tell you where to go by just saying it out loud. So we will do that. So thank you for the good questions here. So okay, a couple minutes on. I'll just drop all these on here
Yep.
for looking ahead so we can get into some Q&A. So, hard to answer some of these, but we wanted to make sure we
Mhm.
walked through the timing. So, CMMC evolving over the next few years, what do you see there, as well as some of the advice on. So we have a lot of customers and a lot of prospects, a lot of companies that,
Yep.
that are trying to do this for the first time. They don't have it yet. They don't have the
Yep.
requirements. They don't have the contracts. That's one thing. Again,
Mhm.
topic we could talk about for a week if we wanted
Yep.
to, but some of the advice, some of the things to think about before we spend about 15 minutes on Q&A.
You got it. As far as CMMC evolving, at some point, eventually there's going to be a switch to NIST 800-171 revision 3. So it's important to kind of just plan ahead for that. Right now, I don't know when that's going to happen. It requires rulemaking to go through that process to change it. So it's probably going to be a little while, but it does exist, and the DoD has defined the parameters, which could change possibly over the next couple of years again as they are getting reviewed, but just know that eventually, whatever you build now for Rev 2, you're going to have to make the switch to Rev 3 in the future. So if you want to look at the Rev 3 parameters and try to plan for your level 2 to meet those requirements, it'll make it less painful during that transition later. There's a lot more flexibility at Rev 2 than there is at Rev 3 with the DoD defining the parameters. So it's just something to keep in mind. But we also anticipate that CMMC is likely to expand out into other federal agencies. There's another CUI rule that is out in draft right now that effectively wants CUI to be consistent across all agencies, and they want everyone who's working with that CUI to be 800-171 compliant. So naturally, I would assume the progression would be that all these agencies can't vet them themselves and are going to use the existing C3PAO network to do those CMMC certifications for their contracts as well. So I think that's likely where we're headed in the next couple of years. No idea how long that'll take. We saw how long CMMC took in the
That's not up to
place.
you. Oh,
But so it could still be a while, but that will happen eventually.
yeah.
And as far as advice for those who are just starting their journey or are trying to avoid stress during an assessment, the number one piece of advice I can give is not to do it all yourself. Get expert help from CCAs, RPOs, companies that have already gotten CMMC level 2 certifications and have been through the process. It's not something one person can do on their own. There's a lot of different departments that need to be involved to make sure that it is consistently applied. And it's a lot to do by yourself. So get that expert help and do a mock assessment are the two biggest pieces of advice I can offer for both. Just making sure you get that expert insight and support, or send your own people through CCA training just so they know what's going on too. I've seen some very successful certification assessments for people who had no intention of doing assessments, but put their people through the CCA training just so they knew what an assessor was looking for. So that would be my biggest advice, is just get help from someone who knows what the assessors are looking for and knows what the controls mean, and do a mock assessment with your team.
Yeah, and we're going to get to one of these questions, but the Rev 3 versus the Rev 2, you are being, so this is a big highlight, asterisk, bold, italicized, larger font. Your CMMC assessment is based on the requirements that at that time.
Yes.
So things
Rev
will
2.
change. You know, and this is the DoD has been saying this for a long time. I know it can be long, it can be frustrating, it can be confusing, but controls are going to change because threats are going to change, right? So it is right now based off of NIST 171, revision 2. So yes, there are changes coming. Kate's absolutely right. You want to prepare for those, but you don't want to prepare for a certification for
early.
Rev 3 because you'll miss on what's required today.
Yeah.
So keep that in mind, write that down, get an arm tattoo if you have to, but that is going to be something to pay attention to, as well as that CUI rulemaking process that's coming up for when this expands beyond the defense side. So, all right, Q&A, the best part. We
Bring it
have,
on.
well, just under 50. This is going to be good. We got just over 15 minutes. So,
All right.
rapid fire. Everyone's got their popcorn ready. I can fly through a couple of these too, like I said, by typing. Mock assessments in here. One thing I'll say before you answer the question, which is the importance of a mock assessment. How do you find one? What do you look for when you get one? A mock assessment is not a gap assessment.
Correct.
So I'll say it again. Mock assessment is you are ready, or you believe you're ready, you know you're ready, you've got high confidence. Don't do one of those. Do not call someone and ask for a mock assessment if you don't even know where your MSP fits in or who on your team answers what questions, and you have a poem that's got 17 things on it. A mock assessment is to be intended for you're ready. And the importance that Katie's hitting on that is that when you do a mock assessment, you're going to pay for it. That's time, it's expertise. You want someone who knows what that means. That's the point of the mock. You are close, but you're not quite ready. Or this is good, and I'll tell you what we see a lot. This is good, and this would pass, but this took way too long. It's too complicated. It's too messed up. Like this is here and this is here, and awesome you're doing it. I can tell the evidence that you were talking about. Move that, consolidate that. Anything to add on that before I ask a super fun question next?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head there. We do offer both gap and mock assessments. They are very different things, and different C3PAOs will tell you the same.
Okay. Another popular question we're getting, because we talked about this, the items that can't be POAM'd versus can, we will send that out afterwards with actual reference to that. That's not, Katie doesn't make that decision, nor do I.
That's in 32 CFR, but we
Yes,
can give you a
yes.
cleaner version of
Yeah, we'll give you a
that.
clear version, and
Yeah.
there are controls that weigh that are 5 points on your Spurs score or three
Mhm.
points on 1 point. So if that doesn't even register on what we just said, we'll get those resources out for you. That's stuff you have to know
Yeah.
before you get into
Critical.
this stuff.
Mhm.
Here's a fun question, and I'll have you answer first because I think we have a similar opinion here. But a lot of questions around the use of GRC tools. And
Mhm.
this conversation has been different over the years. Thoughts on what a good GRC tool, should they use a third-party software tool or how do you feel that landscape looks today?
It's a good question. I have seen some very effective GRC tools in use. But as far as the assessment goes, what goes into that GRC tool and what it can do could impact your assessment. Most GRC tools aren't going to touch CUI. They shouldn't. I don't think there really should be any CUI in your GRC tool. So that would at least make it not a CUI asset. But depending on what your GRC tool does and what it ingests and what it can show, it could be a security protection asset. So it could end up coming into scope depending on whether it is getting security data about your environment. And if it is a security protection asset, then it needs to be NIST 800-171 compliant as well. It's likely not to be tested during your assessment because there is no requirement for a C3PAO to confirm that your SPAs are compliant with all 800-171 controls. But it's something to be aware of. So I know there are some tools out there that are also, they took the extra step to become FedRAMP moderate equivalent or higher, and that's going above and beyond the requirements for a GRC tool. But I have seen several GRC tools that have been very, very effective, and some C3PAOs are starting to be open to actually using the GRC tool and performance of the assessment as well. So I like some of the GRC tools that are out there. I'm not going to name any names, but there are quite a few that have been effective. But you definitely want to be careful about making sure that they're not going to start coming into scope. You want to vet what's going into those GRC tools before you buy them. Make sure that you don't accidentally end up with a CUI asset that's now in a cloud-based GRC tool that now needs to be FedRAMP. Things
Yes,
like that. Yeah.
I'll add to this. If you're new to it, you haven't done a lot, maybe you have to blow the dust off of the focus that you had on it years ago. The first thing I don't, I'll speak for myself here. Buying a GRC tool when you're not close to being ready it can sometimes be an expense you don't need because there are good resources out there. There are good guides out there that if you hire expertise, for example, because you don't have it in house, that person can walk through with you on where you are today, moment in time, because that's what they want. They want to know where you are today. It's the number one thing your customer used to ask all the time is, I don't care that you're not done yet, but where are you today? Because if you have a lot to do in this short window of time, huge risk. If you're
Yeah.
almost there, mock assessments are great. I get it. You'll prove that with certification.
Mhm.
GRC tools are good. There are some good ones out there. There are some the output's not as good, but there are some that are expensive, and there are some that are affordable, and there are some that are geared towards this, and some that are not. So that's
Mhm.
another thing. Some add CMMC into this huge list of other frameworks. Those usually aren't overly efficient on the cost side. So if you think you're close, GRC tools are good. If you have your provider, your external providers, internal stuff set up for organization, traceability, down to the assessment objective level, like Katie's saying, how you build some documentation, sure. But if you're not ready to do that stuff, you're going to start triggering a cost that's probably going to be due every month or every year. And
Yeah.
if you're not using it, then you're with the tool there. Okay, thank you for that. Let's see, what was the other one here? The C3PAO one. So,
Yeah.
yeah, let's touch on that. How do you know which ones are good and
Mhm.
that's in quotation. So thank you for that. But what's a good C3PAO versus some of those things you highlighted on maybe some caution flags?
Yeah, so that's one of the free resources we have on our website is about choosing a C3PAO, and it's just a little article about the types of questions that you should be asking and vetting in your C3PAO. Obviously, everyone always looks at price and schedule. Those are their two number one things when they're looking at a C3PAO is, are you way more expensive than everyone else, and are you available in the next couple months? But it is really important to ask the questions about how they approach GRC tools. If you have one and you want them to use it for an assessment, ask if they will use it for the assessment or if you still have to go upload everything to somewhere else. Um, you want to ask questions about what they allow you to do during that 10-day correction window. You want to ask questions about how they approach on sites and travel if you have physical security in scope. If they do sampling of sites or if they're going to need to see every single one, because all of those are different bits and pieces that are going to factor into your cost, your time, your effort. Um, Always interview your C3PAOs just to see if you get a feel for whether they're a good culture fit for you too, because there are a lot of different companies out there that some of them are much more regimented than others. Some of them are much more personable than others, and it's just something that you get a feel for when you talk to them. And sometimes with your C3PAOs, you're going to be speaking to more of a sales rep rather than the actual assessor. If you want to speak to assessors, ask if you can speak to an assessor. But it's definitely an interview process. It's not something that you can just kind of really compare to companies on paper and be done. I've seen companies reach out to me that say that they've vetted like 10 different C3PAOs before they picked the one that they wanted as well. So that it is a process. And of course, things like schedule and time, ask about what their requirements are. If you end up having to reschedule, if there's a fee associated with that, or if there's a certain time that you can reschedule with no fee, like all of those different bits and pieces. So there's a lot of different questions you should be asking. One of the hot topics right now is what the C3PAOs think about Windows Hello. So
Mm,
like
mhm.
definitely ask the types of questions where an interpretation of a control could make or break whether you pass. If there is something that you implemented in your environment, ask you, I mean, they might not be able to tell you right away, like yes or no, but they might be able to kind of give you more insight into whether or not you are likely to have that like Windows Hello be accepted as a feasible solution. So because there are some of those gray areas out there. So make sure that you are asking the technical questions too to kind of see how your C3PAO is interpreting certain requirements.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, we're getting some questions. These are good. These are the frequently asked, but now it's
Mhm.
closer. So I
Yep.
get the question is for those that are and feel free to say you don't want to answer this one, and I'll
Yeah.
give my answer. But um, we're seeing notices and
Mhm.
indicators, we'll say, in requirements from their customers that do reference things like 7012 and 7019 DFARS
Mhm.
related clauses, but uh, not clear on CY, which we know that's a whole nother conversation. Um, does any of what people are seeing today really indicate whether they will have a requirement for a C3PAO or will it be self? Is there anything in the, it's all right. The answer is there's no answer to that, but
Mhm.
anything there that you feel are really good indicators of, well, what to prepare for?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say without, I mean, the answer is just it's going to be written into the contract itself, but that doesn't help you prepare
Right.
because if you're going to go bid on contracts and you want one and then you're like, oh no, this says certification and we didn't do that, like what are you going to do? So I don't think that there's a really easy answer to that. I at one point think I heard that self-assessments were going to be used for CUI basic and certification was going to be required for anything above that, but I don't know if that's actually true. That was just something that I heard at one point.
Yeah, well, I kind
Um,
of said that in some kind of ways that weren't a formal
right.
comments, I think, which kind of threw some people off.
Hmm.
Would be awesome if that was as clear as day on how to do
Right.
that. But
Right.
okay, well that's good. We don't have to spend a ton of time on this. The
Yeah.
way we kind of talked about this earlier, so that and there's a handful of questions on that.
Hmm.
Always ask your contracting officer. Ask your customer. Make them. It's hard. I know it's easier said than done, but get them to respond with some sort of clarification that you can hang on to. You're trying, right? You want to do the
Hmm.
right thing. It is not always clear if CUI is it should be, but it's not always. And there are contracts and solicitations. There are questionnaires that say, "Hey, are you going to have this?" Well, if you don't have the requirements, then you're not actually required to. But do you want to? Do you want to be in that sandbox? And that's what they're trying to build, right? If you don't have the ability or the proof that you can handle this data in the event that we do send it to you with a contract down the road, then you don't get to play, in that sandbox. So that's okay. But if you already have the contracts in your the DFARS 252204-7012, 7019, 7020, and they have been requiring you to enter a score, self-assess, have the requirements of NIST 171 in place, you should with highly assume you're going to
Yeah.
have a third party before you think you are. So don't assume you're going to have, and I answered that live for somebody, don't assume you're going to be able to do a self-affirmation, which again is not just a self-assessment of I'm good, here's my letter that says I am. You are taking that step of accountability to enter that back to the DoD for them to call you someday and say, well, then walk me through what you self-assessed on. And if that's wrong, that's a bad spot to be in. So I'm going to address the cost one. I don't think you want to answer this one, Katie, but I do want to
Yep.
highlight two things on the cost. You did talk about what impacts the assessment.
Mhm.
Um, I can give ranges that I've heard, and you don't have to
Mhm.
shake your head or blink twice or anything like that. But there is a cost of implementing the requirements, and there is a cost of having a certification assessment done.
Mhm.
Those should be in separate line items on a budget because they're not the same. So they expect you to have done all this and have
Mhm.
that in place, and your cost of your assessment shouldn't be astronomical if it doesn't take forever. So
Mhm.
I'll give some examples. I know for a fact there are C3POs out there they have really good CCAs. They've got a team. They're not adding 700 people to their team, taking any assessment they can get. They know what they're looking for. They know, like you said, they know how to price it. They know what parameters, they know what to ask when they put their bids back and their pricing back to you, the customer. There are some that won't even look at assessments that are under, say, $50,000 because they have a market of OSCs that they are good at. They know what they're looking for. And I'm talking those that are probably bigger, maybe more a little more complex. And then there are some that are absolutely built on smaller, medium-sized OSCs who have smaller scopes or are using things like QuickTrack or other external providers who, do the same thing and have proven it, have clean documentation. They've seen it before. Some of the low end stuff is we have seen some that are in the 25, 28, 30 range. I would say that's low in the market. I've seen some that have been 150. They're not necessarily our clients, but I've seen that. I hear that. We are surveying that too because we
Mhm.
do care about what C3PAOs our customers go to and our peers go to and people that we don't work with. We don't want them to end up in this mess of lowest bidder. You take the lowest price on a C3PO right now, you're probably getting what you paid for.
Yep.
But if you have your stuff together and you have high confidence, the good ones will say, awesome, we can have that done in like you said earlier, Katie, a shorter period of time. We don't have to
Mhm.
spend as much time with you. Hallelujah, they can move on too, and so can you. So anything to add to that? I don't want you to have to step over any lines here. But
Yeah, I mean, I can't give specific numbers, but I can also say that every C3PAO, just so you're aware, is required to have a lead CCA, a CCA, and a CCA QA on every assessment. So that's a big part of what's driving some of those costs too, is at a minimum, we need 3 people who are certified to the CCA level to be participants, and that's per Cyber AB in the cap. So that is a big part of why we price the way that we do, is because while we could do an assessment with one person, we're not allowed to.
mhm.
So I know we are constantly trying to reevaluate and shuffle around our pricing to try to be as fair and as reasonable as possible as well. And we try to take factors into consideration too. But there comes a point for us too where we can't go below a certain number without really operating almost at a loss at that point, just because of the cost of the people time. But we do try to keep our numbers as low as we can to try to be as competitive as we can. We know CMMC was expensive to get in place in the first
Yep, yep.
place, and we know it's a huge lift and a huge headache for those defense contractors too. So we try to be as fair as we can with our pricing.
Yeah, and that's on purpose, by the way. So
Mhm.
the DoD did take a little bit different approach than maybe some other cybersecurity standards. I know we're coming up on time. I have one more question for sure here that I
Mhm.
want to get to. Um, the DoD wanted the market to price itself.
Yep.
So they didn't want to set prices on some sort of pricing table. And that's really how it should be. It's just going to take a while for that to level out because CMMC is going to expand and they have to have enough. There has to be the supply and demand and all of that. That has taken time and it shouldn't just be anybody can do these. To Katie's point, you shouldn't have like, Aunt Susie and someone shouldn't just be able to take a test and say, I can figure this all out based on whatever price I want to charge is not a good strategy. So over time, that will get far more clean. You'll have a lot more questions to ask about, hey, how has it gone? Do you have people like us? And those bids will become competitive, but they should be very transparent, which is good. And you want to work with people who know what they're doing. There's no question about that.
Mhm.
I'll answer this one quick. How long does a certification last? Great question. They are good for 3 years, but the requirement is that you keep it in place at all times unless you make
Mhm.
changes and assess and you follow NIST Standard 171. And there are now we don't have to spend a lot of time on that. It does not mean that when you get your certification that you put your feet up and go work on other stuff for 2.5 more years and come back. So we're going to see, in my opinion, lots of continuous monitoring focus over the next two,
Oh,
three
yeah.
years to look back on how things were going before. So keep that in mind. But once you are certified and in good standing and you keep your stuff in place, you have annual requirements within these controls and these objectives. So those have to stay in place. But in the DoD's eyes and your customer's eyes, you will have a good standing for 3 years until you get recertified or make changes, in which case requires another certification.
And just to kind of add on to what Derek was saying, you do still have to go into SPURS every year and affirm that your score is still 110. So there's an expectation that you're doing the continuous monitoring, you're doing an annual self-assessment. That senior official who goes in and says, yes, this is still accurate. If it is not accurate, you are liable under the False Claims Act. So make sure that you are doing that continuous monitoring and maintaining your compliance after certification.
Yep. Yep. Thank
Mm.
you. I know we're at time, and I'll say this
Yep.
to end up. Thank you, Katie. This was awesome, and I wish we could sit here and do this for another 2 hours, but everyone's busy. So there are emails on the screen right now. These slides are going to get sent out. The recording will be available. There are a lot of good questions in here that are a little specific for us to be answering out loud right now because
Mhm.
it's for whoever's asking. These are good questions. I highly encourage you reach out to that ATI webinar email here. You have our email on there. We'll get you to the right people. We'll have Katie. If it's a great one for Katie, we'll get you to Katie on those. Really, really encourage you to understand expertise. It does matter. If you can't tell, we're pretty genuine here. I know Katie and her team are too. We're not going to guide you down some path that doesn't make sense or get you to people that waste time with you. So thank you again, Katie, for being here. We're going to do this one again because these questions are going to be just as relevant and more clear in the future. And thanks for being here. And then I'll pass it back over to Chris and team at ATI.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you, Derek and Katie. And thank you everyone for joining. As Derek stated, this webinar will be posted on that webpage later on in the probably next week. And if you do have any additional questions, feel free to reach out to those email addresses on the screen. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.